The Murree Expressway is known for its beauty, but those who drive it after midnight know another side of the road, one drowned in fog so heavy it feels alive. That night, taxi driver Hamza was returning to Islamabad when the mist suddenly thickened, swallowing the headlights and pressing against the windshield, like something trying to get inside. He slowed, gripping the steering wheel, when two figures appeared ahead. Children. A boy and a girl, standing completely still in the middle of the abandoned road. They wore old colorless clothes, their skin pale against the fog. Assuming they were lost, Hamza rolled down his window just a little, and the boy lifted his head. The eyes staring back at him were wrong jet black from lid to lid. No whites, no pupils, just endless darkness. The girls were the same, cold and unblinking. Their voices came together in a flat, emotionless tone. "Please, let us in. We're lost." Hamza felt an icy pressure in his chest, an instinct that screamed to run. But before he could react, the children suddenly appeared closer right beside his window without taking a single step. Panic surged through him. He slammed the car into gear and sped blindly into the fog. But even as he distanced himself, he heard whispers in the back seat. Voices that shouldn't be there. Soft, childlike murmurs repeating, "Why didn't you help us?" And when he reached the checkpoint and looked in his mirror, believed in superstitions. His last phone call, however, told another story. He was whispering, terrified, telling his brother that two children had appeared from the fog and were standing in front of his car, refusing to move. The call abruptly cut off. At dawn, police found the vehicle with headlights still on, engine running, and the driver's door wide open, yet Asef was gone. What chilled investigators was what they found inside. Small, wet footprints on the dashboard and front seats. Far too small to belong to any adult. Later that day, CCTV from a toll booth surfaced. The final frame showed the outline of two tiny figures standing behind Asef's car as it approached, their eyes glinting black even in the grainy footage. Locals whispered that the children were not asking for rides anymore. They were choosing who didn't get to leave the mountain. And the fog, once harmless, now felt like a curtain drawn by unseen hands, hiding what walked within. After the disappearance, locals began to report strange sounds drifting from the pine, soft, rhythmic tapping like fingers knocking on car windows. Sometimes drivers heard voices calling their names, even if they had their radios off. A shopkeeper at a roadside dhaba swore he saw two children standing just beyond the tree line, staring silently toward the traffic with their heads tilted in unnatural angles. And then came the recordings, dash cams picking up faint whispers inside vehicles, despite the cars being empty. The most disturbing clip came from a tourist couple. The camera caught their argument, the hum of the engine. And then at exactly 3:09 a.m. a child's voice whispering right beside the microphone, "Stop the car. We're right here." The couple claimed they hadn't heard it at the time. When people from Murree heard the recording, they all said the same thing: the black-eyed children weren't ghosts. Ghosts didn't leave footprints. Ghosts didn't speak into cameras. Whatever these things were, they were physical, and they were getting closer. Image prompt, Part 3. Dark atmospheric horror art of dense pine forest at night beside a mountain road, fog drifting between trees. Two ghostly children with pitch-black eyes stand partially hidden behind trunks. Dashcam POV style lighting. Cold blue tones, unsettling supernatural mood. 3 days after Asif's disappearance, retired schoolteacher named Imran Saeed experienced something that would shake the entire valley. Imran was a calm, educated man known for his quiet nature and refusal to believe in local ghost tales, and he often took late-night drives along Murree Road to clear his thoughts. That evening, as he climbed the steep, twisting path near the old radio tower, he felt the temperature drop sharply inside his car, as though someone had opened a freezer door beside him. His windshield began to fog from the inside, not the outside, and a thin veil of mist coiled around the dashboard vents like living smoke. Then, through the thick whiteness outside, he heard something his own name. Not shouted, whispered, slowly stretched out, as if spoken by someone who didn't know how to use their mouth properly. Imran. "Stop." The car. The voice floated from the fog outside, but it felt like it was inside the car as well, crawling under his skin. Imran's hands shook as he tightened his grip on the wheel. He told himself it was a trick of the wind, but then something tapped the rear window once, twice, 3 times soft, delicate, exactly like the tapping of a child's fingertip against glass. His breath caught. He did not dare look back. The 4th tap came harder, then a 5th, then a slow, dragging sound across the glass, like nails gliding lightly across a schoolboard. Imran forced his eyes forward, accelerating despite the sharp curve ahead. Suddenly, 2 figures emerged from the fog on the right side of the road. Standing inches from the guardrail to children, motionless, staring directly into his headlights. Their eyes were perfect circles of endless black, reflecting nothing, absorbing everything. The boy raised his hand and pointed at him, his arm moving with an unnatural stiffness, as if joints were merely suggestions rather than parts of a body. "Imran," the girl whispered, her mouth curling unnaturally wide. "Why are you running?" Imran swerved violently, heart slamming, tires screeching across the asphalt. He did not stop until he reached a gas station far below, where he collapsed by the fuel pumps, gasping, trembling uncontrollably. When attendants checked his car, they found a long, thin smear across the back windshield, like small fingers coated in ash, had dragged themselves across the glass. Imran never drove again after sunset, and he told villagers something no one has forgotten since. They know our names. They know who they want. And they're not calling for help. They're calling for company. Image prompt part 1. Dark horror illustration of a fog-filled mountain road on Murree Expressway. A car windshield fogged from inside. Outside the vehicle, 2 black-eyed children stand at the guardrail, staring at the driver with pale faces and void-like eyes. Soft tapping fingerprints on the rear window. Cold blue-gray tones, cinematic dread, pine trees fading into thick supernatural fog. Her name was Ariba, an 11-year-old from Rawalpindi, who vanished during a family trip to Murree 2 years earlier. Her case had gone cold, but her mother, Farzana, never stopped searching. One night, Farzana received a phone call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was weak, trembling, childlike, yet unmistakable. It was Ariba Ami. "I'm cold," she whispered. "Please, come get me." The call lasted only 13 seconds, and investigators traced the location to a section of Murree Road, known for thick, unnatural fog, the same place Asif and several others had disappeared. Farzana and her brother drove there immediately despite police warnings. As they approached the curve, headlights barely cutting through the dense mist, they saw a tiny figure standing on the roadside shoulder. Farzana screamed her daughter's name and ran toward the silhouette, but her brother grabbed her just in time, because as the figure stepped forward, illuminated faintly by the car's beams, they saw it wasn't Ariba, as they remembered. The child's limbs were stiff and pale. Her dress was dirty, torn, decades out of fashion. Her hair fell in wet, tangled strands across her face. When she lifted her head, her eyes were bottomless pits of pure black Ami. The thing whispered, voice overlapping with a second voice beneath it, one older. "One, not human. Come with me. I'm waiting." Farzana collapsed, screaming, while her brother dragged her back into the car and sped away. But the creature was faster than any child should be. In seconds, it appeared again, this time on the left side of the road, then ahead of them. Then beside the driver's window, flickering between positions like a shadow caught in a broken light, the fog pulsed around it like living breath. Farzana swore that as they escaped, she heard her real daughter crying somewhere deep within the fog, but the voice distorted, stretched and twisted until it became the same cold, emotionless tone the black-eyed children spoke with. After that night, Farzana stopped searching. She knew the truth. Whatever was wearing her daughter's voice was not her daughter anymore. 1 week after the string of sightings, a leaked police report began circulating quietly among Murree officers. The report documented an incident involving 2 highway patrolmen who were stationed along the expressway during the early hours of the morning. Their body cameras captured what officials later classified as equipment malfunction. Though anyone who saw the footage knew it was nothing mechanical, the video began normally routine chatter, engine noise, the crunch of gravel under boots. Then the camera lenses began to flicker, exactly like they do when static electricity interferes with the signal. As the fog thickened around them, one officer asked, "Do you hear that?" The audio picked up a faint rhythmic tapping coming from inside the fog. The tapping grew louder, faster, until it sounded like dozens of tiny fingers drumming on invisible glass. Then two small silhouettes appeared in front of their headlights. The officers drew their weapons, shouting commands. But the children didn't move. Their heads were lowered, faces hidden behind matted hair. Slowly, they raised their heads, and the eye sockets staring back into the camera were too perfect. Featureless black voids. One officer gasped and stepped back, but the children's bodies twitched unnaturally, like puppets pulled by unseen strings. Both lifted their arms in unison and pointed directly at the officers. The tapping stopped. Then a voice came not from the children's mouths, but from everywhere at once. A deep, layered voice, composed of many whispers. "You don't belong here." The body cams distorted violently, flashing static, showing frames of stretched faces and wide black eyes. In the next clear frame, both children were suddenly behind the officers without noise, without movement, standing inches from them. One officer collapsed immediately, heart reportedly stopping from shock. The other fled into the fog, screaming his partner's name. He was found hours later, sitting on the side of the road with a blank expression, muttering one sentence over and over, "They are not children. They are something wearing children." The report was buried, the footage supposedly destroyed, but every officer in Murree whispers the same thing now. The black-eyed children don't just appear. They surround you. And once they choose you, they follow. The black-eyed children were no longer confined to the foggy bends of Murree Road. By late winter, sightings had begun creeping closer to human settlements' small towns. Hillside motels and even tourist lodges perched above the valley. One such lodge, the Pine Crest Rest House, became the site of an encounter so disturbing that its owner abandoned the property within a week. It began when 3 university students, Bill Noman and Hareshekt, in for a weekend escape. They wanted snow, silence, and a break from the city. What they got was something else entirely. On their first night, as the wind howled over the pine canopy, the power flickered repeatedly. The boys laughed it off, blaming the storm, until Harris noticed something strange in the window, a small handprint. Perfectly shaped, perfectly centered, and pressed from outside on the second-floor glass. Billa wiped the fogged window clean, but within minutes, another handprint appeared. This time lower, smaller, like a child pressing softly against the pane. The unease deepened when they heard tapping from the hallway, slow and deliberate, echoing through the wooden floors. Noman opened the door, expecting a staff member, but the hallway was empty. The tapping continued, now behind them, coming from inside the room. When they turned, the wardrobe doors were trembling slightly, as though something was brushing against them from the inside. The lodge's generator died at exactly 2:47 a.m., plunging everything into darkness. And in the pitch black, through the stillness of the room, came a voice, high-pitched, fragile, wrong. "We're cold. Can we come in?" The boys froze. The voice wasn't coming from the hallway. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from directly beneath the floorboards. Billo grabbed a flashlight, hands trembling as he swept the beam across the floor. The wooden panels were shifting ever so slightly, bulging upward as though small fists were pressing from underneath. Haris screamed and stumbled backward, knocking over a chair, and then the boards cracked, just enough for a pale, tiny set of fingers to slip through, reaching blindly into the room. "Please, let us in." Before the boys could react, another set of fingers pushed through. Then another. Then another. Small hands, dozens of them, pushing, scratching, clawing at the wood. The children weren't knocking. They were digging their way in. The 3 friends fled in blind panic, sprinting into the hallway. The emergency lights flickered, revealing the far end of the corridor where 2 children stood perfectly still, staring directly at them. Their jet black eyes reflected the dim red light like the surface of dark water. As the boys ran downstairs, the lodge's front windows began to rattle violently, as if invisible fists were pounding from the outside, trying desperately to get in. By morning, the manager found the lodge empty, every door wide open, every window covered in small handprints. Dozens of them. No one ever slept there again. A forest ranger named Kazım was one of the few people who took the black-eyed children seriously from the beginning. Not because he believed in ghosts, but because he had tracked animals his entire life. He understood prints, movement, patterns, and the prints that appeared near Bourbon after the lodge incident were wrong on every level. Kazım discovered them early one morning while patrolling a quiet path behind the hillside. Small footprints barefoot, child-sized, but perfectly spaced, as if the walker never stumbled, never shifted weight. The tracks were icy cold to the touch, even though the surrounding ground was dry. And stranger still, the footprints went in only one direction. They did not come from anywhere. They did not lead to anywhere. They simply began in the middle of the path, continued for 20 meters, and then vanished abruptly, as if whoever left them had walked straight into thin air. Intrigued and increasingly uneasy, Kazım followed the prints into the deeper forest. Weaving through pines, shrouded in drifting fog, birds were silent. Even the wind felt muted. The world around him seemed trapped in an unnatural stillness. Eventually, he found something worse, a single long tree trunk with tiny handprints covering its entire surface, as though children had been climbing it in circles. But none of the prints faced downward. Every handprint faced upward, as if the children weren't climbing the tree, but crawling down it head first. Then, from somewhere behind him, a twig snapped. Kazım spun instantly, hand moving to the torch strapped to his belt. But the forest was empty, too empty. No movement. No animals. Only fog drifting lazily between trees. He turned back toward the trunk and stopped breathing. Two children now stood beside it, pale, expressionless, heads tilted slightly, as though studying him. Their eyes were the familiar black voids, but their skin cold. Bruised-looking, seemed stretched too tightly across their faces. Neither blinked. Neither breathed. They simply watched him. Kazım raised his radio with shaking hands, whispering into it, "I have visual repeat. I have visual in on something." Before he could finish, one of the children opened its mouth, just barely. Enough to speak in a flat, damp voice. "You shouldn't have followed us." The second child then took a step forward, but the motion was silent. No crunch of leaves. No shift of weight. No sound whatsoever. It moved like a shadow, gliding across the ground. Kazım staggered backward, stumbling over a root. In that instant, both children disappeared from sight, simply gone. Not faded. Not run. Just vanished from one frame of existence to another. Kazım ran until his lungs burned. When he reached the outpost, he found two small footprints outside the door, fresh, wet, and pointed toward the building. They had followed him back. The final incident of Chapter 3 unfolded at Khalid Public School, a small hillside institution that served the children of nearby villages. Classes had just ended, and the winter sun had dipped behind the ridge when a group of teachers preparing for the next day heard a knock on the playground side windows. A soft, polite knock. They assumed it was a parent, but the knocking continued steadily, moving from one window to the next in a slow rhythm, traveling along the building as if someone small was walking beside the wall, tapping as they went. One teacher, Miss Heine, stepped outside into the growing dusk. The air was unnaturally cold, breath misting instantly. The swing set creaked, though there was no wind, and near the far end of the playground stood a small silhouette, child-sized, perfectly still. "Hello?" she called. As she took a step forward, the figure took one step backward, completely synchronized. She tried again. The figure mirrored her motion exactly, like a reflection trapped in the wrong place. Another teacher came out behind her. "Hina, look at the eyes." When the figure raised its head, the sinking dread hit all at once. Two deep black voids stared back at them, shining faintly in the dusk like polished stones. The child's mouth twitched, stretching into something that wasn't quite a smile. The school lights flickered, Every classroom window behind them suddenly fogged up from the inside, as though something was breathing against the glass. Then more knocking. Not from outside. From inside the classrooms, dozens of tiny taps. Dozens of tiny hands. From empty rooms, one teacher ran to the front gate but stopped dead when she saw two more children standing there, blocking the exit. Their heads slowly tilted to the exact same angle at the exact same moment. The black-eyed child at the playground finally spoke, not with a child's voice, but with a voice layered with hundreds of faint whispers speaking in unison. "School is over, but you are still here." The teachers backed away, terrified. The children vanished. The fog receded. The windows cleared. But ever since that night, janitors report seeing small handprints appearing on the classroom. Windows every morning, prints too small to belong to any of the students who attend. The winter fog hung over Murree Road like a living shroud, thick enough to swallow headlights whole, and quiet enough that even the wind seemed afraid to disturb it. That night, as the investigation deepened, Arish found himself driving alone. Toward the upper bends, those same twisting curves where the black-eyed children were first reported, but the road he entered felt wrong. It stretched out longer than it should have, bends repeating, signboards flickering in and out of existence, and the trees lining the roadside seeming to lean closer with every passing minute, their branches scraping against his vehicle like skeletal fingers. The GPS spun uselessly, resetting every 30 seconds, while the radio emitted a low-frequency hum that made the air vibrate in his lungs. And then up ahead, he noticed something impossible. The fog parted just enough to reveal two figures standing dead center in the lane. Children, motionless, heads slightly tilted, their clothes damp as if they had crawled out of the earth, their bare feet blackened with soil. Arish slammed the brakes, his tires screaming into the void. But as the vehicle jolted to a stop, the children didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Their eyes, those pitch-black, bottomless voids, absorbed the light, swallowing it like a living darkness. The world collapsed into the fog, leaving only Arish, the children, and a stretch of Murree Road that no longer existed on any map. Arish's breath frosted the inside of the windshield as the two children stepped closer, not walking, but gliding, their movements jerkless, unnaturally smooth, as though the air itself carried them forward. The temperature inside the car dropped so sharply that frost crept along the dashboard like tiny white veins. When Arish tried to reverse, the engine coughed once and died, leaving him in a coffin of fog and silence. The children came right up to the hood, their faces illuminated by the weak glow of the dying headlights. Their skin was so pale it looked almost translucent, stretched tightly over their small skulls, with dark veins threading faintly beneath. The boy tilted his head slowly, as if studying him, while the girl raised one hand and pressed her palm against the windshield. That was when Arish saw it. Her fingers were elongated, far too long for a normal child. Bending slightly like damp twigs, a whisper began to seep into the car, not through the vents, not through the doors inside his mind. A soft, rhythmic plea. "Let us in. We are cold. Let us in." The voice sounded like many children speaking at once, layered, echoing, overlapping. Arish squeezed his eyes shut, fighting the sudden dizziness that washed over him. When he looked again, their faces were inches from his own. The boy's mouth curved into a small, unnatural smile, revealing teeth that were narrow and sharp, like splinters of bone. The girl tapped the glass twice, each tap sounding like it came from inside the car rather than outside. The forest behind them shifted. The tree trunks seemed to inhale, the branches retracting as if something enormous had passed through unseen. Something was moving in the fog, something much larger than the children. Arish realized then that the children weren't the threat. They were merely the messengers. Arish's trembling hand hovered over the ignition, even though he knew the engine was dead. Panic crushed his chest as the whispering grew louder, no longer a plea, but a chant. Dozens of overlapping voices spiraling into his skull. The children's mouths didn't move. Their black eyes remained fixed on him, devouring every flicker of fear. And then suddenly, both children turned their heads in perfect synchronization toward the forest-like hounds alerted to a master's call. Their small bodies stiffened. Their faces went blank. The whispering stopped. A silence fell so heavy that Arish felt it push against his eardrums. The fog thinned just enough for him to see it. Something enormous shifted between the trees, its presence not defined by shape, but by distortion, as if reality bent around it. The tree trunks leaned away from it, bark twisting like they were in pain. A long, towering silhouette moved parallel to the road, its outline flickering like a corrupted image. He saw limbs too many, bending at unnatural angles, dragging across the ground as something exhaled a low, wet, rattling breath that made the glass vibrate. The children took one step backward. Their bodies still faced the forest, but their heads snapped back toward Arish, their necks bending far beyond what was humanly possible. Their voices returned, this time echoing directly inside his skull. It has chosen you. It remembers you. It is hungry. Arish fumbled for his phone, desperate, shaking, but the screen showed nothing but a looping image of the road ahead, repeating endlessly like a cursed video. The creature in the fog shifted again, closer now. A massive limb scraped the asphalt, leaving a trail of deep gouges. A second limb followed, insect-like, jointed wrong. The fog coiled around its body like it was hiding something too horrifying to be seen fully. The children suddenly vanished, no footsteps, no movement, no transition. One blink, they were there. The next, nothing. The temperature dropped to freezing. Every hair on Arish's body stood on end. Something was rising from the fog behind his car, tall enough to cast a shadow over the entire vehicle. And then, a single knock hit the rear window. Slow, heavy, intelligent. He didn't dare turn around. The knock on the rear window still echoed in Arish's bones as he forced himself to turn. But before he could see the thing behind him, the world convulsed. The fog exploded outward, swallowing his car, the forest, the entire road in a tidal wave of pale rolling mist. The creature's towering outline dissolved into the expanding white, and the sound of snapping trees echoed like gunshots. Arish felt the fog push through the car vents as if it were alive, squeezing into his lungs, numbing his limbs. He stumbled out of the vehicle, thinking he could run, thinking distance would save him, but as soon as he stepped onto the road, he realized the truth. Murree Road was no longer a place. It was becoming an infection. The fog didn't stay along the upper bends. It poured downslope like liquid night, spilling into valleys, swallowing villages, drifting past checkposts, slithering through the pine forests toward the lower towns. It clung to the ground like fingers searching for warmth. Somewhere inside it, Arish could hear the creature moving, not walking, but spreading, its limbs dragging, multiplying, scraping across asphalt and stone. With every movement, the fog thickened, as though the entity was birthing the mist itself. In the distance, faint lights flickered, cars stopping, horns blaring, people calling out for help before their voices cut abruptly into static. The children began appearing along the roadside, not two, not four, but dozens. Their shapes materialized. Within the fog, eyes blacker than the night, their small heads tilting in unison toward the towns below. They whispered as one. It is awake now. It remembers the world. The road was only its cradle. Arish staggered backward, watching in horror as the electricity along the hills flickered and died, plunging entire neighborhoods into darkness. Dogs howled from far-off villages. Then even those sounds vanished, muffled into silence as the fog reached them. A low rumble shook the ground, a sound like an old massive structure breaking free from the earth. The creature was no longer confined to Murree Road. It was entering the world, stretching beyond the forest, shadow flickering against the fog like a monstrous, spreading stain. For the first time, Arish understood. The black-eyed children were not hunters, they were heralds. And the real horror was only beginning. As the fog crept beyond the hills and smothered the small towns below, the world fell into a silence heavier than death. Phones stopped ringing, radios hissed with static, and the power grid faltered under the unseen weight pressing on the landscape. People barricaded themselves indoors, but the black-eyed children had learned to adapt, no longer confined to roadways or forests. They slipped through cracks in windows and under doors, their tiny footsteps echoing in empty hallways like a sinister lullaby. Arish wandered through the darkened streets, clutching a flashlight that barely pierced the suffocating haze. Every shadow shifted unnaturally. Every corner seemed to breathe. From the fog came whispers, voices layered with 1,000 tones, speaking in fractured languages that twisted the mind. He heard his name, then the names of neighbors, friends, strangers, all called out in the same cold monotone. "Come with us. The world is changing. Join us." The children appeared everywhere, on rooftops, in alleyways, behind broken windows, always silent except for their head-tilted stares. Eyes like empty voids consuming the light around them. With each appearance, the fog thickened, spreading like a living organism, drowning the world in gray. Then came the tremors. Buildings shook as if the earth itself was breaking beneath them. The air filled with a low rumble that resonated in Arisha's bones. The creature beneath the fog was awakening fully, no longer bound by the limits of the road or the forest. It had grown, fed by the fear and silence. As he turned a corner, Arish found himself face to face with one of the children. The black voids of its eyes seemed to pull at his very soul. It whispered, not with words, but with a voice inside his head. The road was only the beginning. Soon, all will belong to the fog. Arish realized there was no escaping the spread. The entity had begun its slow, relentless conquest, and the world would never be the same again. With the world slipping into shadow and silence, Arish found refuge in an abandoned radio tower perched on the edge of Murree. The last link to the outside world was a battered shortwave radio, its crackling static now the only sound cutting through the omnipresent fog. As he keyed the microphone, his voice trembled. "This is Arish. Anyone out there?" The fog. It's spreading. The children. They're everywhere. The thing beneath the mist. It's waking. Static hissed back, followed by a faint response. Another survivor. A voice breaking through the white noise. "We're holding in the valley, but the fog creeps closer every hour. It's like a plague." Suddenly, the radio signal was swallowed by a chilling interference. The air grew ice cold. Arisha's breath fogged in the enclosed space. Shadows pooled at the edges of the tower room, coalescing into the familiar shapes. Dozens of black-eyed children, faces emotionless, eyes endless voids, absorbing the faint glow of the radio equipment. Their heads tilted in perfect unison. The radio emitted a low, multi-layered whisper, 1,000 voices speaking inside his mind, repeating the same phrase, "You cannot fight what you cannot see." "The fog is coming for all." Arish dropped the microphone, heart hammering, and turned to flee, but the children had already closed in, their silent forms pressing like cold water against his skin, their black eyes drinking the last of his hope. The final transmission crackled and faded into the void, a haunting echo, lost in the endless fog that now blanketed the world. The black-eyed children were no longer just a mystery of Murree Road. They were the harbingers of a darkness spreading beyond control, a darkness that had begun to consume the earth itself.